So we see on the handout, we see the Americans liberating from Normandy in the west and the Russians liberating from the east. We had the liberation of France beginning at D-Day and the turning point being Stalingrad. And after it became pretty clear at Stalingrad, with 2 million casualties, that the Russians would be pushing the Nazis on the east and the Americans pushing the Nazis from the west, Adolf Hitler realized it was kind of a lost cause, and he actually, it says on the handout, committed suicide. So now with just Japan to fight, the U.S. worked on liberating the islands taken by Japan. When you take a look at one of the most famous examples that was being liberated, it was this island of Iwo Jima. On this small island, 18,844 Japanese soldiers were killed. And what about the Americans? Well, we lost 6,821 Americans to take this island. 19,000 Americans were wounded. What's shocking was how big was Iwo Jima? It wasn't big at all. In fact, on the handout, it's only this small island was only 8 square miles. So people started doing the math and saying, listen, if we lose that many guys to take 8 square miles on some random island, how many is it going to take to take over Japan? Well, it says on the handout, the estimate was 100,000 Americans dying just to take over Japan. Is there a different solution, especially because Japanese soldiers often were famous to fight to the death? The best example of this is this Japanese soldier, Hiro, who was one of the last Japanese soldiers to surrender World War II, and he surrendered in 1974. He actually didn't believe the war ended when, radio went out and newspaper reports were dropped into the jungles of the Philippines where he was, and he thought it was just a bunch of lies. He spent 29 years hiding out in the Philippines, in the mountains, in the jungle, and over those 30 years, he would come down from the mountains and attack and have shootouts with the local police, killing 30 Filipino civilians, mostly farmers. This man and others spent decades in the jungles of Southeast Asia, not believing the war was over. He didn't surrender till 74. It says, now the idea is, how do we avoid losing so many people to the Japanese who just won't quit? And the answer is the Manhattan Project. It says on the handout that this, to limit American deaths, the U.S. pursued the Manhattan Project to develop an atomic bomb. The U.S. President FDR had died, and he was replaced by President Truman, who actually didn't know about the Manhattan Project. It was a secret even to the vice president. He learned about it once he took over, and he approved the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945, leading to 100,000 people killed. There's never been an instance where one bomb has killed 100,000 people. And 3 days later, we dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki, killing 80,000 more. The Japanese didn't realize we didn't have more, and so they surrendered. With surrender, we finally see this liberation pattern in Europe. Everything in green freed by the Americans, everything in red freed by the Soviets. The Allies liberated, you'll write down Western Europe. And the nations that we freed would be two things: democratic and would embrace capitalism. Those are the things that the green nations would have: capitalism and democracy. The nations in red would be forced to be communist. They'd be freed by the Soviet Union. And it's true that they were glad that the Russians freed them from the Nazis, but sadly, the control of the Nazis was only replaced by the control of the Soviet Union, as all these countries in red would not have freedom of elections. They wouldn't get to choose. They were liberated, yes, from the Nazis, but now conquered, in a sense, by the Soviets. This division of Europe, East and West, would lay the foundation for what we call the Cold War.